at the same time, it has layers like CBAs and ferry conto, the leave accrual system. So, do you think the market underestimates how complex Denmark payroll is?
The funny thing is that some people call the Danes the Nordic Arabs, which actually mean that we like to ride our camel and we let the camel lead us to where the water are. And Casey, it is also important to understand that every company has to use the possibility of the technology development. If you can develop a person's job with technology, AI as well, you would be in a position that you actually can make the performance even higher.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this podcast episode of the series Voice of Neeyamo Pays Denmark. So, this is going to be the very first episode of this series where we bring in payroll experts in the payroll industry to understand the payroll landscape in a better manner. Remember that Neeyamo is the most trusted payroll solution and trusted by Fortune 500 companies. Out of all the other USPs that we have, the one most trusted and banked on USP by our customers is that we have our own one single integrated tech stack, which makes the payroll transparent, accurate, and easy to process. So, uh, I don't want to delay this any further. I want you all to get introduced to our guest for this episode. And I am delighted to welcome Mr. Kim, one of the most respected voices in Danish HR community and the vice chair of Dansk HR. Kim is the founder of Danish HR and has spent over 3 decades and has completely dedicated his career towards that. And he has, under his leadership, Danish HR has grew into one of the Denmark's leading HR knowledge and networking organizations, and it has continued to support thousands of HR professionals and companies. Kim, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Casey.
So, Kim, shall we proceed with our questions?
Let's do that.
Okay. So usually Denmark is often seen as one of the most mature and digitized payroll markets globally. But what we are seeing across organization is that complexity today isn't coming from the systems anymore, which was the case earlier. It is coming from expectations. So from your perspective, what is the biggest shift that is happening in Denmark payroll today?
Well, I would start with say that you can part it up the time in about two or three different kind of areas. One is up till the finance crisis in 2008, and the one is after, and the third part is after the corona. Earlier, it was so that we have actually a very low percentage of people unemployed, which we still have. For example, at the time, it's about 3%. The lowest we ever have been, that was up to the finance crisis in 2008, that was about 1.8% of the people. So what we often see is the payroll is not only about payroll, it is also what kind of benefits. We talk quite a lot of what we call EVP, employee value proposition. Which kind of thing had the impact on our employees that they are getting more connected with the company and the colleagues, and they are proud of the company and their products, and they want to stay in the company just only for 2 or 3 years, but maybe for even 10, 30, 40 years. Now, connected to that, one thing is very important. Always take care of that the employees have the salary on time. If you don't do that, then you have a very big problem. And even people, even it's only one day delayed. We see people are nearly in some personal crisis because they're so focused on, well, I need the money to pay my bills and things like that. But concerning about what actually also worry people, that is the amount of personal goods that you actually can have on the way you are employed. Do you have a free car? Do you have free newspapers? Do you have free mobile phones? And all that is often connected to your payroll, which means you have to pay tax if you have a free car, free telephone, or free newspapers, which means that the company and the delivery company of the payroll system should be in a position where this has to be on every time that you have your pay, you've been paid, it should be 100% secured that is right. Now, even it is a small amount of money. I would say it's maybe 50 euros that people can really get mad about that there's just a small difference. And if you say to them, well, you'll get these 50 euros in next month, they'll say, no, I want the money now. That is quite funny. In some way, money always disturb people, even they have a good job and they're well paid. That is one of the small things. But looking at that, and particularly after what companies had learned after the finance crisis and after the corona time, it is that we have to be more focused on that when you have a payroll system, it first of all has to always be correct, and you have to take care about all the different kind of things that are coming into the payroll. Now, look at this transparency discussion that we'll come back to later on, but the most important thing is to understand what it means for employees to have the salary at the right time.
Very well put, Kim. I also had similar thoughts, and I second whatever you said, because I don't think that payroll is anymore a back end function where it is just about numbers and calculation. It is about the confidence, about the employee confidence that you gain, and about the leadership, about the accountability and transparency that you can deliver to the employees, right? So absolutely right. And as we, you touched upon transparency, I would also would like to know in very specific, the recent EU Pay Transparency Directive is clearly one of the biggest upcoming changes, not just for payroll, but for how the companies think about the compensation itself. So, do you think organizations in Denmark are truly prepared for that level of transparency?
Again, you can divide it into two or three focus. One thing is that we in Denmark have about 58 groups companies, the very large companies, and in what we call a small and middle-sized company, we have about 300,000 companies, and there's a big difference about what things they have to do here on this new legislation from EU. The reason why we all know, but if you go into small companies and for example, in their finance department, there's only 3 employed, you can't make this kind of transparency for a group of 3, which a lot of Danish small companies are in the size. You can maybe have 50 people who are skilled workers. At that area, you of course can have this possibility of comparing salary because of knowledge or because of diversity. But the funny thing is, when we talk about skilled workers, it is so regulated in Denmark because of unions. So that area is no problem. It is when we talk about the white workers, the white collar workers, that we have this. And Denmark is a funny country. We are, as the Swedish people, a member of EU. Now, when EU is coming up with a new regulation, probably the Swedish market would do it the day after. The Danish labor market will not do it the day after. We are not as controlled and wants to be the best guy in the class as the Swedish want to be. No, we often wait and try to find out what is actually the meaning with this new law and how should we build it into our organization so it makes two things as cheap as possible to do, and it makes as much interference in the way we work. Because I've been visiting German company, and that goes also for white collar workers. If you go out with a customer, you have to check out your system in the German company, even if you're working in an office. We don't do that in Denmark. We haven't been doing that since, I think, 1900. But what we will see now is that EU would like everybody, even the white collar, that every day you have to make a sort of a notice about when you are at the office, what you work with, and if you have any overtime. And this kind of transparency also continues when we look at which salary people is getting, and particularly about the diversity and particularly the difference between men and women salary. We have a sort of you could say language in Denmark saying the person you have to hire is the best person for the job. No matter if it is a man or woman, if they're born in Denmark or comes abroad, you have to hire the person with the best qualifications because that is what is the best for your organization. Now, there can, of course, be some kind of areas where we see there is a difficult to understand that the men maybe prefer to, for example, as engineers, they prefer to hire men because they have this funny idea about that men are more to understand how engineers work, where they maybe said, well, women are good in hospitals and be a doctor or things like that. But I do understand why EU have this focus, but they also have to understand that it's different from country to country. And Denmark are in some way not the best guy in the class because we always wait until it costs us less money and we can do it in a proper way. And maybe the Sweden do it from the start and they make all the mistakes. And then we can look at the Swedish and we can pick out what the right thing to do. And we let them also keep what you shouldn't have been done in Sweden.
Thank you for being so honest and telling how the law actually gets implemented. And after, that's, I think, a best way, right? Because in our industry, I particularly feel that there is no room for errors because, there is so much transparency that is already there when you're reporting to scat authorities. It is regularly monitored, right? Already a lot of things are regulated because of CBAs and the reporting structure in Denmark and payroll industry. I feel that there is a lot of things that are already in place. So when there is a new law that comes up for gender parity and how the people in different genders are paid and what is the transparency in their pay structure and compensation, right? So definitely you can look into your neighbors and what they're doing about it, and then you can see how effectively you can adopt the new law, right?
Yeah.
So very
And
well
and
said. Yeah.
and also Casey, some of the biggest Danish companies who has a lot of business abroad and even with departments around in the world. They know, for example, the American Glassdoor. And in Glassdoor, you see even a lot of Danish who's employed in a company, and nominees can put in the salary, and they can also point it out on a level of 1 to 10 how they find the company. So if a person from abroad would like to work for example, in Novo Nordisk, they can find Novo Nordisk on Glassdoor.
Yeah, Glassdoor is something that we also predominantly use here before, joining a company. Fresh graduates, they tend to look up the company and how it is performing and what is the satisfaction level of the employees working there, what is the usual, a time period that the employees are retained in the company. So all of this, there, like you said, with the technology coming up, everything has been made very transparent already, right?
That's right.
Yeah, true. So while we are talking about all these things and also kind of touched upon the CBAs, now moving ahead, Denmark is often perceived as a straightforward market, right? Not with a lot of things that are hidden or something like that, or concealed. So because of how digitized it is, I would say, but at the same time it has layers like CBAs and ferry conto, the leave accrual system. So do you think the market underestimates how complex Denmark payroll is actually, and is perceived in a different manner than it should be?
Well, first of all, you're right. Denmark is actually one of the countries in the whole world who are most digitalized, which means that when people go and work, even when they're coming as young people, for example, the Z generation going into work, everyone knows how to use a computer. And that is one of the benefits. We saw that under the coronavirus that Denmark actually changed from one day to have people to work at home, where in Germany it took them quite a lot of months because their system didn't function that way, and a lot of people didn't have the possibility of when they were working at home to contact their business computers at the main office. But saying that, the funny thing is that some people call the Danes the Nordic Arabs, which actually mean that we like to ride our camel and we let the camel lead us to where the water are. We don't try to tell the camel to go for the water because the camel knows that, which means that when we're sitting on the back of the camel, we are quite relaxed because we know the person who's sitting at the other camel. We are the people in the whole world who have the most trust in people we don't know. 3 out of 4 people we meet, we trust them, even we haven't met them before. That also means that we can work in another way. We are not afraid about new regulation. We are not afraid of meeting new people. We are not afraid of going into a new task because we have the support of our company, because our company doesn't have a sort of if you make too many mistakes, you'll be fired. No, we actually said we would like you to do mistakes because you'll be learning from that. And that will increase your knowledge or your skills, which means that you will probably not doing this mistake another time because you have learned. And then what you also could get this knowledge to other people in your organization, we will even be better in the competition for the market we are in.
So, how does these CBAs, because like I have researched, in Denmark, there are a lot of CBAs, industry to industry roles, and there are like unions, there are different rules, there are different structures. So how does the CBAs and models like Ferry Conto affect the payroll processing? What impact do you think that it has? Because these are some things that are very specific to Denmark, or CBAs are actually specific to Europe, I would say. But
Yeah.
Ferry Conto is pretty much specific to Denmark. So in your experience, do how do you think that this impacts the payroll processing, and how we have to be on, it keeps us on toes who are in this industry to calculate the pay, because already it is complex thing to get the payroll runs accurate every month on month, right, without errors. So when these things come into play, how does these things impact the entire payroll processing?
Yeah, the good thing is that we saw the start of the unions and the organization who actually have the companies in their kind of union. It started up in 1900. Actually, they signed an agreement in 1899. And since that, we have the pleasure of only having about two organizations who talks. One represented the unions and one represented the companies. And that is, they have a very good dialogue. It doesn't mean that you have 10 organizations here and 10 organizations here, and they all have to agree. There is in Denmark normally only two who make the main agreement. Now, the other thing is that what is very good for a lot of Danish companies is that we have a lot of small IT organizations. Now, if you look, for example, on payroll, I can tell you, I could maybe find maybe 20, 25 very small organizations who actually do payroll for the companies, which means they have a very good way of doing it, maybe even for a branch, which means that some organization only use one kind of payroll system, which is manufactured for their branch. For example, the auto industry in Denmark is a very good example. The bank industry as well, the finance area as well, they're using only one kind of system because this system will always be updated and aligned with the regulation, and also sometimes even the incoming new regulation, who maybe further on will first be rolled into the organization maybe 2 years. Often you can already see these in the system because they are ahead of what the system should be working with.
So, what I could understand is that certain industry specific CBS that are there. So, there are certain payroll providers and companies who specifically cater to these industries and the companies, right? And they have been the legacy systems for these particular industries, if I'm
Yeah,
not wrong, right?
yeah. If you go, for example, 10, 30 years back, there was
Mm-hmm.
one very big organization in Denmark who did the payroll for maybe 70% of all the Danish companies. But if you look up what actually or how it's changed in about the year 2000, you would see that the particular areas in the particular branches, they sometimes have very specific demands in the payroll system. So we often see small companies pop up and say, well, we'll be very good for retailing, or we'll be very good for the production companies. So this has been the way it has been developed. And this very, very large organization that for 30 years did about 70% of all the salaries running in Denmark is still existing, but they maybe only today have about 30% of the market.
Understood, understood. I mean, that actually reduces the, the work or the pain that goes into every now and then manually checking if the entire payroll process is happening in a right manner, right?
Yeah,
So the trust is built over what, let's say, 3 4 decades. So that just can't be broken or overseen in 1 or 2 days.
yeah.
True. So, also, I read somewhere that there have been some changes in the concurrent leave accrual calculations and the ferry conto. So, what are those changes and how that has been, incorporated in payroll processing now?
Well, the funny thing is that it is not only the demand that's come from EU that the Danish payroll system should be focused on. It is also some of the changes that have been done on the labor market, which made new agreement between the unions and the organization for the companies. And there is, particularly in Denmark, because Denmark is actually doing quite well. We are one of the good guys in the class because we earn a lot of money. We have a very low percentage on unemployment, and the level of the living standard in Denmark is actually very high for the average of the Danish people. So when it is a good time, we often see that the employees get a lot of very good levels of salary, extra benefits, other kind of uh, things that can be sort of evaluated. If you're looking for a new job, will I work 5 days or can I work 4 days? Can I work at home? Will I get a free computer? Will they support me for extra education? All these things is a part of that. And in many ways, even the payroll system also has to look into this because I can ask my company and say, I would like to have an MBA in London. And they will say, okay, Kim, we can accept that, but 1/3 of the expenses you have to pay yourself, but we can do it over the payroll. So there are things in Denmark who is actually connected to all the benefits we have in our country, which they don't have in Sweden or Germany or France. And these areas, the payroll system also have to understand and to work with.
So the payroll system has to be updated in such a manner that all the new updates has is being feeded into the system and the logics is feeded
Yeah,
into the software, right?
yeah. And of course, if we talk about the small middle sized organization, they would never pay me an MBA. I would probably in most you have to be more than 200, 300, 400 employees before they said that it's a value for the organization, Kim, that you started up to have an MBA.
All right. So, moving ahead, one theme that keeps coming up is fragmentation, right? Multiple vendors, multiple systems, different processes across countries. So, do you think this is still one of the biggest structural challenge in payroll today?
I think so, yes. And that is if you, for example, take a company like Maersk or Novo Nordisk, who have so many employees around the world, that their system has to be aligned. There can be different way of the payment or in Singapore or in Denmark, but the funny thing is that you have to have a system that very fast can bring you the right figures. How much do we have to pay this month across the world? Which kind of payment, which kind of payment system do we use? how much do we have to pay in tax in Singapore and in Denmark from the employee's salary? All this has to be every time at the end of the month ready to press the button I said go. So that means that we see some of the very large companies, they won't be using a very small company who can deliver a payroll system in Denmark, but they have to have these very, very big companies who can do this, like SAP, for example.
So even the big companies, they go after the companies that can exclusively cater to providing all the payroll requirements, is what
Yeah.
you're saying, right? Yeah, true. And also, we are increasingly seeing organizations, move away from heavily fragmented setups. That was the case earlier, not just for efficiency, but because without visibility and control, compliance becomes very difficult. And for our industry, I would say all the compliance and statutory requirements is the backbone. So to manage that while you're scaling, right, the all the companies that are present in multi countries, that becomes a pain point there. And traditionally, many organizations operated with one vendor per country, and across different platforms, across different regions, and no centralized governance at all. So this is something where Neeyamo found out that there is a white space, and that's exactly the kind of fragmentation Neeyamo is focused on, helping organizations to simplify and unify globally as they scale. So because when a company that is headquartered in Denmark, it shouldn't be a hindrance for that company after scaling in Nordics region per se, right? It would be easier for any Denmark headquartered company to expand in Nordics area. But if it wants to expand globally, and then there is hindrance that it is unable to manage all the vendors across all these different places, so then there is a hard stop there for the company. So that shouldn't be the case, right? While you're expanding your global when you're expanding globally, basically.
That is true, Casey, and I'm sure that the companies who maybe is on the European market, the Scandinavian market, if they're going further abroad, like America or South America or Asia, they would always be looking and be prepared when they employ the first person in Singapore or in Brazil, that the system can actually take care of to doing the salary in Brazil and in Singapore as well. So I have even seen companies who has a Danish delivery of the payroll system, that they, when they start off, not only maybe in Europe but even further away, they change the support for the payroll system, because it has to be correct also in Brazil, also in Singapore, and if the decision is done in the right way, and they expect to expand in Brazil and in Singapore as well, you have to make these changes. Then you can't continue using the Danish system that they had been working with for the last 20 years, maybe.
True, true.
Now I just lost you, Casey.
Yeah, I was on mute. So, with increasing focus across Europe on working time and overtime compliance, do you see this becoming a major risk area?
Now the funny thing is that we Danes we are a country, we are people who are quite relaxed. Now, for example, in Denmark, I would say maybe even 80% of all the white collar workers, they don't write down how many hours they work every week, because we have a trust in our people. And if they, for example, has been working Saturday morning because I had something to prepare for Monday morning, and they've been using 3 extra hours, they would find out maybe Wednesday to go on leaving maybe 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock instead, and have the afternoon off. Now that is a trust to our employees that they are in a position that they can take care of it themselves on how they work, and they work these 37 hours per week normally. The difference is that if we go of middle managers level or directors level or top levels as well, there's a difference because quite of these people maybe work 50 or even sometimes even more. But still, again, I would expect when being a top director in a very big Danish company that my salary is on a level that I don't have to tell the company if I work 50 or 60 hours per week, because my salary is so well that it doesn't differ for me. I don't go back and say, well, I had another 10 hours last week. I would like to have 10% more of my salary. No, it is often so that we actually make these contracts without any payment for overtime, but you have to plan the work yourself. So you take care of yourself and you take care about that there will be times where you have to take overtime, but you also have the right to take time off for this hours normally.
Okay, as a follow-up question, Kim, like you said, there is no, stringent oversee that is done, that these many hours has to be put in these many days or only on these days, right? So there is a flexibility that the employee can actually follow, wherein if I am putting my extra hours on Monday, I can take a half day or a day off on Wednesday, right? So, how is this kept track of? Trust is something that I understood. Okay, there is trust from the employer's end, but as a person who is processing payroll, so how I can keep a track of it, that these many hours has been put by the employee and this is the pay that employee needs to be paid, because there might be, a lot of things like loss of pay. The employee might have worked less than 37 hours. So how those things are calculated?
Now, you can set the regulation from EU want us to actually to could show how many hours people work, and that was because of case in German bank in Spain that they put up these rules because German Deutsche Bank, they actually put so big pressure on these two people. They probably worked about 60 hours per week over a period, which means that they were really stressed, and the bank didn't in any way made of a sort of extra payment or telling them that you could take the time off. That was actually the reason why we came up with this rule about notified and to write down how many hours you work. And that have in Denmark been a big discussion. Can we continue and make people work in this very flexible system that we have in Denmark? And the government has said, yes, you can. But you have to write down how many hours normally the person has to have every week. But if the person is coming to the organization, well, it's too much for me, you have to take care of that. But one thing which I actually like with the Danish system is that it is not only the person, it is also HR department. It is also your own chef, your own leader, who has to have the point of view on how you're doing your job. We in Denmark and in Scandinavia, we have a big focus on people, not only to develop them, but to develop them in the right way so they don't get uh, stressed and get ill because of the work, we actually honor work-life balance very much in Denmark. But the funny thing, we actually also have a quite high level of people who are stressed. But there are two kinds of stress. The one that you can take care of, and the one who actually you have to take really care of because you could maybe even get so ill that you have to leave your job. Now, what we do in Denmark is that we not only have a talk one time, two times each year, often we see it, we have it every month to take care about the person that's saying, how are you? How are you doing? Your targets. Do you reach your targets last month? And is it possible that this job is okay for you, that we don't stress you, that we don't overload you with jobs? Because we know today, after so many years of experience for Denmark, that we have to take more care of our employees and to develop them in a way where they can follow and they have the right knowledge or skills, but we don't stress them. And we are one of the countries in Europe who is actually now and been over the last 2 to 3 years looking at maybe in about 3 to 5 years we have only a 4 day weeks of working.
Interesting. Right. So basically, Denmark is all about, how you can keep the employee and their benefits in center, and then the work and everything goes after that, right? So it
Yeah,
is mostly employee oriented and revolves around that. And because, it is all intertwined, right? How well the employees are treated and how well they are given, space to actually grow and explore themselves in the company and learn. That is
yeah,
how they're going to put in all their energy and streamline into working into the company and giving all their time and dedication into the company and the work, right?
yeah.
True,
And
true.
Casey, it is also important to understand that every company has to use the possibility of the technology development. If you can develop a person's job with technology, AI as well, you would be in a position that you actually can make the performance even higher. But it doesn't mean you have to work more hours. And one of the things is OECD had for some years a calculation that said Denmark are one of the three countries in the world who has the highest production value per hour we go to work.
Mm.
Yeah, but we, in average, work about these 40 hours per week.
Hmm. Which might change if it is going to be 4 days working.
That's right. Now, if we would end up in a position that it will be more possible for Danish workers to work, there's two reasons for that. One thing is we have the highest turnover of our
Hmm.
employees in Europe, in EU. It's
Hmm.
about uh, 23% for the white collars and about 30% for the blue collars workers.
Hmm.
And that's quite high. It is because we have this very flexicurity system that it allows us to say, okay, I would like to have a change in my work. I don't mind going for another job. I don't need the same kind of security that we see in other countries like Italy or France, that or even Spain, which is probably the place in EU where they would like to keep the job for a longer period because it's so different or so
Hmm.
difficult to get another job. And that challenge the organization. You have to be in front of what is possible to do for your employees that they'll stay in the organization. And one of the biggest things we probably will see in the next 3 to 5 years, that is the talk about 4 days work.
All right, all right. So, just zooming out a little bit, Kim, um, the flexicurity thing, right? It is very peculiar that when I was reading about Denmark and the payroll industry, so the hiring and firing, it is so flexible. And do you think that is any way affecting the affects the payroll processing while we are running the payroll? Because it it actually has, you know, a lot of addition and subtraction of leavers and joiners and new joiners and their pay structure. So has it been a pain point? Because it happens so often that you're saying, because every month on month then the inputs itself changes to a great extent then, right?
Casey, I'm sure you're right. And you will see that in the future as well. If, for example, looking at the second generation, you will see there will be a challenge for the organization because they'll say, maybe I'll work for you only in 2 months, then I want to go to another. Or they have been in the organization for maybe 3 years and say, I want time off for 6 months. I want to travel with my wife. With my wife, I want to go 6 months to Asia. Now this kind of challenge we hadn't had in Denmark. But we will see with the new generation, they actually planned the time as much as the time with the family. I've been visit companies where we normally in EU and in Denmark. Now, if the man to want to have a time off or what he's getting of time off when they're getting the children, he's getting 2 weeks normally. But we see companies today who's paying the men 6 months free with full salary to take care of their children when they're just born. Which means that the company would be challenged in what their other companies in the branches doing. And if the main company is doing 6 months, you have to in your business as well, you have to give the people or the men 6 months time off, even also with a payment, because of that is the challenge in your branch.
Right. A lot of new things. I am still processing all of it. So in payroll industry, do you feel that you know, one of the biggest questions we often discuss with our clients at Neeyamo is whether you can truly achieve global consistency without compromising local compliance, especially in markets like Denmark, where CBAs and reporting structures add, you know, additional layers like we discussed earlier. Do you think that balance is realistically achievable today?
I really do, because there are two angles of this. One thing is to have the focus on the changes on the labor market, which the payroll system has to be included to. But the other thing that payroll system also should often is to look at, are there some of our system that we could take out, that when we move the development of the payroll system, we will follow the development on the labor market. But this agreement that's been made maybe for 30 years ago, you don't have to have them in your system. So if you expand and follow the market, but you then don't take things out that was 30 years ago, which you don't need to have in your system. So you have to make a sort of following the development, and also be ready to cut down some of the old rules, which now is not necessary, or maybe is only for one person. We have, for example, people who is employed on what we call flex job. That is people who has maybe had a bad knee, and now where they get money from the government to go to work as well, or a part of the salary would be paid. Now they changed the system, so the old way of doing it doesn't interfere with the payroll system for people today who is employed. So you can take this out of your payroll system. And that will be as well, if you look at the time before the finance crisis, there was
Hmm.
a lot of benefits we gave to our employees. But I would say no one employees today wants to have mobile phone for themselves, their wife, and the three kids. They only want it for themselves today because they'll be taxed with all the five mobile phones if they also get it for the wife and for the children, as
Hmm.
well as companies' cars. A lot of them says, well, maybe I just want to be paid for the kilometers I drive, or if I get a company car, I don't want a company car. Uh, I want a company car on a certain level, or it will be too expensive for me to have one of the very big exclusive cars. So there are constantly changes in this kind of system that the payroll system also should be focused on.
Even in our experience, the real complexity isn't just statutory compliance.
Yeah,
It's managing the additional layers. Like if we talk about Europe, it is going to be CVS that are a focal point, right?
yeah.
And which can differ even within the same organization.
Mm.
If there are different kinds of employees, it is going to the CBA is going to differ employee to employee in that organization. That's where having strong local expertise comes into play within a global framework becomes critical. And this is something that we have made our forte, I would say, because payroll can't be completely global. Payroll has to be, get deep dive into the country we are going to work in, and understand everything, the culture, the people, how the changes are happening, what are the government authorities we need to get integrated with, and how when is the payday, because it hugely varies. It can be month end, it can be bi-weekly, it can be bi-monthly, it can vary company to company, country to country. So it has to be hyper local, at the same time having a framework of being global, right?
Yeah, Casey, we have an example in Denmark. We have a holiday which they called Prayer Day.
Hmm.
Now, this prayer day, the government decide that people have to go to work, and that was good for the country. But the payroll system had to take care of this. It actually made quite a lot of extra work for the organization just to make up that two times each year you have to get another extra pay for this prayer day, which earlier was a day off, but now you have to go to work. Now, I would have thought that you just calculated into your monthly salary, but here the answer was no, two times, and each month you pay in money for this account that we will get two times each year for this prayer day where you now have to get to work. I would say, from my point of view, that was a very silly decision for our government. And even now, even at the moment, we don't have the government, but they're talking about maybe to turn it back. I don't think they will do it because it is actually a very, very big change, not only in the way of planning the work, but also in our payroll systems.
So, with increasing transparency requirements, reporting is no longer just about submitting data. While we are doing everything, we are processing the payroll, we are getting the inputs, we are getting the output. Finally, we have to report, right? It is not about data, it's about having visibility, consistency, and of course, transparency, and being able to explain it, what happened, how these new ad hoc inputs are coming into the system, and how it is being calculated. So from what we are seeing across payroll transformations at Neeyamo, reporting is becoming a central capability rather than just an output. You're getting the output and you're reporting. It's not the case now. So how do you see the entire reporting part and the visibility in it evolving?
Well, I would say what is very important for companies who actually develop and support its payroll system, that is that can be different kind of views on the branches. If you are in retail or if you are in the car industry and things like that. Now, what is a very good thing is also for the organization to look at the branch and say, what is it developed in our branch? Is it a branch that's going quite well that we have to do new kind of personal goods for our employees, which have to be calculated into the payroll system as well? Now, it is and it will be continuing to have a more global focus. In Denmark, over the last 3 to 4 years, we had a raise of employees on our labor market, but two-thirds of the people who's going into the labor market to work came from abroad. Only one-third were people who's living in Denmark. Now, whatever you are, a middle-sized or a large organization in Denmark, you have to understand, you have to follow this development there are on the global markets as well. And you have to have system. There are transparency that is updated, that can make the changes. There can be, for example, the differences of Singapore and Denmark, and you have to doing this so you at every time by the first of each month you know that your employees is getting their salary. They have a very good view of the way the salary is calculated, how much is paid in tax, how much is deducted because of personal goods and things like that. And that is what the organization and particularly employees would like to see. And if it is that, they will be very, very pleased, and the company will be continuing using the same payroll organization to support them.
It is all about gaining the trust
Yeah.
of the your client or customer, and they understanding that if anything goes south, even then we will be there to correct it, and immediately there will be some corrective measures that will be taken, and you will make sure that it is properly analyzed and it wouldn't be repeated, and then they also receive the entire payroll output and everything, and reports goes on time, because there can't be any delay or errors, because payroll, while you're working with companies, that well we are processing payroll for huge headcounts. So if one input that is common for everybody, anything goes wrong, and the entire calculation gets all messed up. So yeah, true. I think that's how the payroll industry functions.
Yeah, that's right. And the funny thing is that it is the organization, the companies, that will say, we are very pleased that we're connected to your organization. But the employees doesn't always know who is behind the payroll system. But the organization, the companies, they often to other meetings talk with other companies in their branches, and they'll be mentioning your company's name and said, I tell you, earlier it didn't function, but after we changed to your organization, it now functions so well that we can recommend it this company as well.
True. Because in payroll industry, it's not about, how much you put in the marketing efforts. It's about the word of mouth, right? How one customer goes to another and refers you, saying that I have been using their system, and it is good for me. There weren't any major discrepancies. So that's how you get referrals from one customer to other, or you start to get new customers, onboard new
That's right.
customers every now and
Yeah.
then. So it was very insightful, Kim. The entire all the questions and the follow-ups, and I got to learn a lot. And I'm sure I can ensure that the viewers who are going to watch this podcast are going to acquire a lot of new insights that they didn't know about payroll industry, and very specific to Denmark and how the payroll works in Denmark. And it was a very very insightful conversation, I would say. And I think what really stands out is how payroll today is no longer just an operational function, how there has been a drastic shift, and it's becoming a critical part of governance, transparency, and strategy, I would say.
Yeah.
From collective bargaining agreements
Yeah.
and compliance complexity in Denmark to global standardization and pay transparency, it's clear that organizations need a much more connected and future ready approach to payroll.
That's right. That's right,
So
Casey.
do you want to share anything else that you feel was left in our conversation and vital for us to know?
Yeah. In all my years in human resources, we can see that when an organization or a country is raising the focus on how people are working in the organization and the companies, and to support the development of the people, we can say that it is a benefit not only for the person but also for the colleagues and for the whole organization. And that has been a part in the way we are working in Denmark, that we trust each other, that we want to develop our organization together. And when we get a sort of a specific target, you should also share your happiness with your colleagues, but also with your families, which means that you find or see yourself in an organization as a family, is that we work together as a family. And when we reach our targets, we make everybody pleased and happy about these targets. And that is how we can see that even a small country like Denmark have large organizations like Maersk and Novo Nordisk, or even in the old time BNO. This We are not a very big producing company of products, but we are very big in services and is knowledge sharing. And that has been a very good thing for Denmark, which means that we are a country where things is actually quite well, and we are on a very high level of the value of your life, and the benefits that we have. Even we have quite a big tax paying system in Denmark. Even that, the Danes are very pleased with the neighbors, the colleagues, and Denmark in average.
True. And thank you so much. Thank you again for sharing your perspectives and also your expertise with us today. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast for the very first episode. And even going ahead, I hope that we have more episodes with you. Thank you so much, Kim.
I wish you all the best luck, Casey, and for your organization as well.
Thank you so much.